Okay, comrades, you're all very welcome to this meeting of Workers' International Network. The topic tonight is the United States of America, a very urgent and very current topic, and the influence of the American president across the globe is phenomenal. It's not positive, of course, but it's phenomenal. Everywhere from India, Pakistan, to the Congo, his most recent intervention, to the Middle East, to Ukraine, his hands are staining the process everywhere that he crops up. And then within the United States itself, a massive upheaval, which the speakers will detail. The huge number of demonstrations across American cities a couple of weeks ago, directly against the Trump administration. The raids by the ICE and the police in Los Angeles, and the brutal treatment of citizens there. The harassment and arrest of the Tribune leader of the security workers, the bombing of Iran, the decision of Trump. A recent statement I saw from Trump was that if Mandami wins the election in New York, he would withdraw funding from the city. Everything that is happening in America is a worry and a concern to all of us. And tonight's discussion is very current and very relevant. And in addition to all of that, then, between the capitalists themselves, there's a looming trade war with a threat of 50% tariffs on all European goods, and already 10, 20 and more percent tariffs on goods between other countries and the States. Now, our two speakers tonight are, firstly, it'll be Jack Gerson. Jack is a long-term activist in the socialist movement with a long record of activity and involvement in local actions as well. The other speaker is Richard Mellor. Richard runs a successful blog. He just told me now that there were 80,000 clicks on the blog, a massive number of people. And the blog is there for, I don't know, 20 years, Richard, is it? It's a long
15
time.
or 15 or something, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So it's a long time in existence. And Richard will also be speaking. After Jack and Richard complete their contributions, there'll then be time for open discussion of all of the issues, for questions, for contributions, and for various ways in which comrades wish to develop the arguments in whatever direction they find to be significant and important. So, with that, I'll welcome our first speaker, Jack Gerson. Jack.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm gonna begin with a few quotes on since Finn mentioned Trump's threatening to deport Zoran Mamdani, and I have a few quotes about Mamdani from but not just Trump, but also from the Democratic Party establishment. But I'm not going to focus on that. I'll probably return to Mamdani later, but I want to make sure that I get these quotes in to give people an idea of some of the atmosphere. Lawrence Summers, the former president of Harvard University and former Secretary of the Treasury under Democratic administrations, and one of the big establishment intellectuals and political talking heads. After Mamdani's victory, he called Mamdani's program Trotskyite economic policies. I guess by which he means he thinks they're some form of transitional demands, which they're not. They're quite moderate and mild reforms, actually, which may get to it later. But it shows the threat of calling for anything, that people need, I think. Daniel Loeb, a hedge fund billionaire, said it's officially hot commie summer. And Donald Trump called Mamdani a communist lunatic. And this gives you an idea of what goes on every day in social media. And you may see this because you have access to to what the mass media is saying and what they report as well as I do. But it does give something of an idea. It's like a crazy kaleidoscope of events going on, orchestrated by Trump, who is very performative. So if you just react to events as most people are doing, I think. If this were 4 weeks ago, we'd be focused on the ICE raids on immigrants in Los Angeles. If it were 3 weeks ago, we'd be focused on the US bombing of Iran's Nuclear Enrichment Foundation, distracting from the fact that there were over 2,000 demonstrations with 5 to 10 million people for the No Kings demonstrations just before that. If this were 2 weeks ago, we'd be focused on or 10 days ago, on Zoran Mandani beating the Democratic Party establishment candidate, Andrew Cuomo, the former governor of New York, which shows, incidentally, the state of the Democratic Party establishment in New York, since Cuomo is a disgraced politician who was forced out of office as governor because of sexual harassment and other such behavior. And this week, we just focus on the quote unquote one big beautiful bill. By the way, that's not just an acronym for it, that's its official name, that guts Medicaid and SNAP. SNAP is food assistance to the poor, to low income people, while cutting taxes, boosting defense spending by $150 billion, and increasing spending on Homeland Security by $45 billion, especially for more detention facilities, prisons, and for Trump's wall on the Mexican border. Now, I think that there's a short term and there's a long term, and the short term is distracting from the long term. In the short term, can view Trump as an evil clown, performative, a flim-flam man, constantly throwing in new abominations that distract from the long-term program. And the long-term program is to shred the social safety net, grossly increase handouts to capital, corporations, and the rich at the expense of the working class, and especially disproportionately the poor at the lower end of the working class. That's the long-term program. It's just structural adjustment, that is neoliberalism, on steroids. It's not populism, certainly not the European variety, which is extreme anti-immigrant nationalism coupled with social programs for natives. This is the extreme anti-immigrant while cutting those programs. And also to get rid of regulations that stand in the way of capital, to gut regulations on fossil fuel, and to gut environmental protection, to gut regulations on banking, on cryptocurrency, to gut antitrust regulations that have been punishing the EU penalties against Google, Microsoft, Apple, and so on. All of those get shredded. And that, by the way, is part of what Trump is doing in his tariff policy in the negotiations. So this is very much, a program for a large sector of big capital. And those capitalists who have qualms about it, like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, about, cutting off, programs for fighting disease in Africa, for example, and others, they're not doing anything. They're shutting up. The labor leadership is silent virtually. Sean Fain, the quote-unquote insurgent president of the UAW, supported by Labor Notes and others, has called for organizing for a general strike in 2028. And when 2028 comes around, it'll probably be in 3028. So unless there's more of a mass upsurge. So on one question that's come up now, people are saying the Democrats in Congress, hopefully, and labor, bureaucrats, and so on, well, wait till the midterm elections, and then the Republicans will be swamped, and the Democrats, the freedom-loving, democratic rights-loving Democratic Party will take over Congress, and certainly the House of Representatives, they say. Is that the case? Well, maybe. I think that what the plan of the Republicans is to try to build an electoral coalition based on the anti-immigration. And by the way, the sentiment for that is shrinking, but that's, I think, at the core. And such sentiment is volatile on virulent nationalism, Christian evangelical nationalism, which shouldn't be underestimated, sops to middle-income seniors. The one big beautiful bill includes a very large tax deduction for seniors of middle income. Those with income, couples with incomes of $150,000 to several $100,000, not for the ultra rich, not for the poor, but the ones who will benefit will be the middle income seniors. And I think that's the electoral coalition, which will give them enough of a basis to do what I think they're going to do, steal the election. They're putting the vote counting apparatus in the states they control and districts they control and so on, in the hands of of party stalwarts who are going to falsify the election. So I'm about as hopeful for that as that the courts are going to step in. That's we previously heard, wait till the courts, but the Supreme Court is trying to rule in favor of Trump, or where they feel that they can't right away, for whatever reason, kick the can down the road. No obstacles. Congress is not stepping in. People were hoping that the hardline Republicans, remember, the Republicans have been a anti-deficit party. They've based themselves on fiscal conservatism for decades. The Freedom Caucus, the right-wing Republicans in Congress, who took a hard line on this, all voted for this bill, which is going to increase, according to the Congressional Budget Office, over the next decade, will increase the national debt by $3.5 trillion. Why did they do that? Well, they say that in private discussions, Trump gave them various concessions, which we will implement through executive orders. We can guess what those will be, and what they will be to lay off more federal workers, most likely, and more cuts in programs, which may be illegal, but they managed to get through many of them anyway, and then get deals on others. So that's an overall, picture. I have a picture of Trump living in a house where the only heating is a fireplace, and but there are many, valuable items in it. He appropriates the valuable items for himself, while throwing furniture first into the fireplace, then ripping the material off the walls and throwing in everything to try to keep warm, to try to keep going. That's what I think that they're doing. That's my image of what they're doing with capitalism, throwing everything in, and there will be a reckoning to this, I think. But the reckoning is going to require a mass movement, not reliance on the courts, or on the midterm elections, or on the congressional Democrats, or never Trump Republicans. So will there be such an upsurge? Well, I think that, it's worth commenting on Mamdani, in that Zoran Mamdani's victory in the New York primary in that regard, which is, I think it showed a few things. I think it shows that across the entire political spectrum, the establishment has lost all credibility, and at least in popular terms. And secondly, that people will vote for what they need, for the basic necessities, and decent things in life. Basic, not even decent. What did he had moderate reforms on housing, transportation, childcare, food, grocery distribution. So and they were very, very modest. But they're attacked as communists, and not just by Trump and hardline Republicans and billionaires, but by Lawrence Summers and the mainstream, many of the mainstream Democrats. What are these modest proposals? One that got a lot of attention was public option on groceries, to have publicly run grocery stores. How many? It's a pilot program with 5, 1 per borough. How many grocery stores are there in New York? About 15,000. And this is a pilot program to see, and it's being slammed as as communist. But only a few months ago, people were screaming about the ripoffs by the supermarkets on price gouging. And that was true. Now we're told, the supermarkets, they're well run and they only have a very narrow 1 to 3% margin. So how can we go against them? You'll drive them out of business. I mean, this is bourgeois propaganda, but that's the kind of atmosphere that we have. So that's one of it. On housing, it's to freeze the rents for the rent stabilized apartments. There are about 1 million of those in New York City. New York City has, I grew up there, rent control and rent stabilization. Rent stabilization allows for modest increases in rents more than rent control. And it's for having a freeze on rent stabilization rents for some period of time, building 200,000 new apartments. None of this is novel. This has been done periodically by mayors. Universal child care, that's a good idea. Public universal child care and so on. It's a very moderate kind of New Deal approach. But people say, does this mean that the Democratic Party is going to be taken over? Is there going to be a split? Well, I hope at some point there's a split in the Democratic Party. But in order even to get this modest program, let me say another one. It's he wants to fund this by increasing the state income tax up to the level of California's and New Jersey's taxes, and to increase New York City's income tax. New York City is kind of a one-off in having a city income tax. The very few cities that I don't know of any others in the U.S. that have them. New York's had it for as long as I can remember, back from when I was growing up. He can't raise those taxes without the approval of the governor and the state legislature. And the governor's already said, I ain't doing it. On transportation, he wants to have free rides on New York City buses. New York City buses are regulated by the Metropolitan Transit Authority, which would have to approve that. The governor appoints the majority of the Metropolitan Transit Authority board. What can force this? What can force these changes to come into effect and much more is a mass militant movement. Without that kind of a movement from below, there's not much chance of it. Most of the labor unions, very few supported Mamdani. They supported Cuomo overwhelmingly. The old Democratic establishment, which Lawrence Summers quote on Mamdani's program being a Trotskyite economic policies, gives you an idea of where they're at. But right now, there is not that kind of an upsurge. Will there be? Will Mamdani's victory? Is that heralding something? Well, maybe. There were 50,000 volunteers, for Mamdani. That's nothing to sneeze at. But the vote for Mamdani, from what I've seen so far, what's being reported, was primarily from middle income people. The working poor voted, those who voted for Cuomo more than for Mamdani. That's not that doesn't have to be fixed in time, but that's the way it was right now. in terms of taking over the Democratic Party, a couple of things. One is the US is a very large country, 350 million people, almost 4 million square miles. It's very diverse, and the Democratic Party is locked down by the corporate establishment. What would you have if you took it over? You would have to fight against the funding of the ultra rich and the capitalists who dominate it. But let's take a look at what the insurgents who've come in the past. Bernie Sanders has had the opportunity to actually split the party. He had mass support. He could have run in 2020 when they actually took the nomination out of his hands and gave it to Joe Biden. He chose, to stay in loyally and herd people in. He says he's an independent, but he's one, who caucuses with the Democrats in Congress and acts like one, and basically is a sheep herder. He did a similar thing in 2016 when the nomination was taken away from him by Hillary Clinton, and there was a mass movement there urging him to split. He said, "No, stay in," and herded everybody in. One more thing I want to say before I forget, in terms of people, just to put what Mamdani election may mean and not mean in perspective. A couple of years ago, a man named Brandon Johnson was elected mayor of Chicago. Brandon Johnson was a former Chicago teacher who was heavily supported by the Chicago Teachers Union, known as the most progressive teacher union and maybe union in the country. Still very much hailed for its 2012 one-week strike, which we can talk about if we had time, the pros and some of the cons of that. But Brandon Johnson was elected with support from Chicago Teachers Union, from DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, and much labor support and support from community organizations and so on, working class support. The most recent poll, he's now mayor of Chicago. The most recent poll on Brandon Johnson showed that he has 14% support in Chicago. Why? Well, when you're elected, it's very difficult under capitalism to actually put into effect the kind of policies that you're calling for. And you wind up having to adjudicate over and deal with all the different and various different currents. Also, Brandon Johnson supported, opposed very strongly the genocide in Gaza. Now, I think he made a mistake in initially supporting uncritically the October 7th massacre rather than condemning it by Hamas. But overall, he stood, with the Palestinians, and has been slammed in it by the American mass media and politicians and corporate Chicago. The governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, is from the richest family and a Zionist, and the richest family in Chicago. They control, Chicago politics. Penny Pritzker, his sister, ran the schools for many years. Was the Alpha school board member, and they've gone after Johnson tooth and nail. But that really shouldn't be a surprise to us in the Bay Area, where we have had a string of such progressives, running successfully for city council, being a majority of the city council in Oakland, which is a city council run city. The city council has more power than the mayor, and the school board, majority. But when they come in, I used to tell them at school board meetings, you've come in now and you're choosing to execute the policies of the state, which tells you we're going to cut off the funds unless you close schools and cut back programs and generally support charter schools and privatization. And one by one, they fall in line and become the executors, the executioners of public education. In the absence of a mass movement which is fighting for much more, and not just a movement, but the need for a mass workers' organization, a political party, political organization and organizing. These will be evanescent, and I'm afraid. And what we've seen here in Oakland, what's going on with Brandon Johnson in Chicago, and so on, will fold. I do believe, I don't know how much time I have, but I've been talking too much and not talking about what I think is going to happen to Trump's coalition. I think it's going to blow up. I think it will implode or explode because they have so many different conflicting interests that they can't keep together with just the flim-flam. For example, on the anti-immigrant, going after immigrants and deporting all undocumented, well, people probably know that Trump had to make exceptions to that for agriculture, for the so-called hospitality industry, restaurants, cruise ships, hotels, and will have to do so for many other industries like construction, meat packing, canneries, and so on, and so many others that basically run on immigrant labor, most of which is undocumented. So Trump is trying to keep various balls up in the air. He has a movement which has a very strong militarist component and a very strong isolationist component. So he does these short-term things like, to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities and then pull back, to execute Soleimani and then and do some bombing in Syria, very short term. It's not simply that he has a short attention span, which he does, but this is the way he keeps the balls up in the air. I don't think that this can go on indefinitely, but in the absence of a mass pushback, if it's just things like the No Kings demonstration, and then people go home, and those demonstrations are, just really run by, Democratic Party. The Indivisible, the group behind it, was formed by, initiated by Democratic Party staffers. If it's just that, it won't go very far.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jack. I'm sorry. You've been talking for over 20 minutes. So could you start?
Okay, I'm going to stop now.
No,
you should have told me earlier.
No, you don't need to stop.
Earlier.
You don't need to stop now. No, just draw your remarks maybe towards the conclusion. You don't need to stop.
I'm going to conclude. I'm going to conclude now by shutting up because I'll just keep going for another 20 minutes if I don't. Okay. And Richard has a lot to say, and will do it better than me. Okay.
Thank you, Jack. I just want to comment. If I interrupt you when you're speaking, it's not with a view to you stopping immediately. It's just giving you some guidance as to how to conclude.
But Richard has to speak, and speaking more than 20 minutes is more than enough for this meeting.
Okay.
So I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Jack. Richard, you're next. Richard Mellor.
Well, Finn, I don't know if it's best really for you can decide because I didn't really prepare an intervention. But it's best for you to decide. If I speak now for another 20 minutes before there's any discussion among you, I could, if you want to respond, that's a very good introduction by Jack. If you want to, that I agree with it wholeheartedly. If you want to maybe respond to it and have some discussion, and then I'll come in, or I'll come in the discussion. Or if you want me to, I will. I took some notes. I will speak now if you wish, but I thought you might want to have a bit of a response among yourselves first. But what do you want to do?
Yeah, I think that's a very useful suggestion, Richard, that the discussion would develop a little bit from the points Jack made, and then you would intervene.
That's fine. Yeah,
I think that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
And then you can make any additional points you wish, but you'll have some kind of guidance on the mood of the meeting, having listened to the points.
Yes, it'd be good for me to listen to what you have to say. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll let the discussion develop for a while. Then
Richard
can come in and make some general points in his own contribution, because your contribution will be valuable, given your experience, particularly in the
and I think Eric, there's another American here too. He may want to contribute as well. So
okay, so we'll open up a discussion and following on the interesting points that Jack made, a very informative, interesting opening contribution. So it's open to any comment who wants to speak. So we've got Ken, your hand is up there. So you're first.
Right. Thank you very much, Jack, for that introduction. You mentioned the possibility that Trump's coalition might fragment in the future. Do you think that Elon Musk's America Party is likely to have any impact on that? It will, for one thing, make it a little difficult for Trump to repeat his slogan, "Make America Great Again," because he might have to caveat that and say, "But I don't mean Elon's party." So interested in your reflections as to whether the Musk party has got any traction at all. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. No, other comrades. It's an open discussion, so anybody can say anything, ask any question they wish, contribute in any way they wish to the general discussion. And there are American comrades here and comrades in many countries. So I'm sure you all have lots to say. So who's next? I don't see any.
Ken
Roger.
Syme.
Yeah, Roger has his hand up there. Roger.
Oh.
Well, I didn't really want to come in so early, but since
Ken
nobody
Syme had his
wanted-
hand up too, Roger.
I just
No,
spoke.
Ken's speaking. Ken's already spoken, yeah?
Oh,
You want to say more, Ken? Sorry.
No. Just slow to lower the hand, that's all.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm probably.
well, Roger,
Yeah.
if you don't want to do that, I will come in now. I thought there would be. If you want me to come in, it would help you, Roger. If you don't want to come in so early, either way, I don't care.
Really, I don't care either. Maybe,
All right,
maybe
go
better
on.
if you come. Yeah, okay. Give me time to get my thoughts a bit more in order.
Okay, I'll say a few words then.
Okay, Richard, away you go then.
All right. A few things. One in relation to Mamdani, and Jack's commented on this, so I don't want to go too much into it. But it's a very important development. I mean, 50,000 volunteers he had, and a number of those were trade union rank and filers. And we shouldn't underestimate the importance of it. But again, and I think this is a major issue in the US today, that people feel there's nowhere to go. There's no, I mean, let's face it, only 1 in 4 Americans, eligible voters, voted for Trump. 100 million didn't vote at all in the last election. This is sort of normal. And so you had Sanders, who's really betrayed people. I wish Sanders would just F off, to be honest with you. He's had opportunity. He could have built something in relation to the political apparatus early on. He could have, who knows who he could have pulled out with him of the Democratic Party. Ilhan Omar, Presley, Rashida Tlaib. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw it in Britain, but they had or Ireland, but they had when Netanyahu came and spoke and was applauded at the Congress, Rashida Tlaib, who represents one of the largest Arab American Palestinian, mostly, and Syrians in Michigan, she's holding up a little sign, "War criminal." Where were her Democratic Party mates there? And so who knows, had Sanders taken the opportunity to break, that he couldn't have pulled the squad. He couldn't have saved AOC, who is now a bright shining star in the Democratic Party. She'll be looking forward to the next election, a possible presidential run and stuff. They've all gone over. So Mamdani, it's very positive, but as Jack says, there's a strong sense among Americans. We've heard it all before. If you take New York City, I watched him and I've listened to some of his speeches. He's a very interesting guy. Never pointed to the trade unions in New York City. The teachers, AFSCME, my union, has the largest council it has is in New York City. The ATU, the transit workers that can shut the city down. You saw the dock workers. I know there's a sort of gangster leadership in that union, but the thing is that he never mentioned never oriented to them in any way. And this is what Sanders does also, and types like that. Somebody said to me from Britain, well, he was introduced by a trade union leader. Sure, they play that role. They'll bring out Sanders because of his decent reform program. They'll bring him out, and it takes the heat off of them. And Sanders won't turn around to them or mention to the audience that he's speaking is, oh, by the way, this person leads a union of 600,000 people, and they could blah blah blah. So the trade union leaders are very, very quick to associate it with these reform bourgeois. That gives them takes a little bit of the heat off of them. Don't look at us as leading anything. And then they can blame the Democrats when the crap hits the fan. In terms of Jack's points that he raised at the beginning there about what we would have done a few weeks ago and a few months ago, this is how fast things are developing. This morning, it's the floods. There's been a catastrophic floods in Texas. I mean, I put a short video on Facebook about it. I mean, it's just, there's 50, a whole a camp of kids was wiped away. They're still looking for the children. It's had a huge effect. And I spoke to, I had a couple of back and forth with a friend who follows the blog down there. He said there's real concern that they cut funding, and that there's concerns about Trump's cuts and the cuts, worker cuts, all of these slash and burn that he's doing. And I feel listening to it here is that when I first joined the group, and I got not much faith in the left at all, to be quite honest with you. But I didn't not learn things. I wasn't taught things that weren't bad. I was taught some things. They helped me. And I remember we used to talk about the Great Depression and how the working class was stunned in its initial response to the Great Depression. And then you had those big strikes in the early part of the 30s, the AFL ones that were beaten. And then you had, as we all know, the rise of the CIO and the general strikes and so forth. And I think that's what's occurring here, is that it's going to take a little bit of a while. There's no left opposition. There's no political opposition. The trade union leaders, as Jack said, it's disgraceful. I call them the dogs that never bark. I was in a little back and forth on X, on Twitter, with the leader of the flight attendants union. And because she had raised a general strike, this happens every once in a while with trade union leaders. They raised the general strike. And I had a back and forth with her, and it was okay, it was not bad. And I thought she's cut me off now. But I don't know, where is she? I would love to know what this sort of discussion, because they're having within the organized labor movement. I don't have a fetish just about the organized labor movement, but it does. I do not. We should not underestimate, despite the low percentage, the trade union organized labor controls all of the major industries in the United States are organized. Both the docks on both sides, the docks and the shipping and stuff like that. So that's a thing that's missing with Mandami. If he wants to make any, they will. If he gets to be mayor, they will come down on him. The full force of the U.S. bourgeois will come down on him, and it's not ruled out that Trump won't deport him. It won't. It won't. I was reading this morning that kickstarting the proposals to deport naturalized citizens. I'm a naturalized citizen. We were talking with Frank Hammer yesterday, who's a naturalized citizen, and he was a trade union leader in Detroit. He's actually had a campaign to try and find out about his brother, who was assassinated in El Salvador, and thinks was a CIA agent. So it's heating up, this assault, and this is what happens when you don't take notes. is that I'm very, very positive about the Well, let me raise one other thing. I see this morning, I don't know if you read it, Jack, is that two of the Supreme Court have taken rather of sort of breaking from the majority of the Supreme Court on a decision of a lower court. And I think I wrote it down. What did she say? Oh, it was I think her name's Sotomayor. What they did was a lower court put a blockage on stump on deportations. I think it was a lower court, not the Supreme Court. And Trump went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld that's this, put a stay on it. Well, now two of the justices have supported the lower court. And the writing for the minority, the judge says, the Supreme Court judge, the administration has the Supreme Court on speed dial. In other words, attacking the political control of the Supreme Court and its independence. So there's divisions taking place and little fractures taking place everywhere. And as I think about it, the mass media in the United States is just so immensely powerful. And again, as Jack has said about our size, I mean, it's a continent. I mean, I just drove to 300 miles eastward and I'm still in California. I've talked to some young women up there near Lake Tahoe. I was in a coffee shop. They were telling me about how they felt. They can't get housed. These are 21, 19, 18. They can't get, they're living with their parents. They can't afford the rents. I drove deeper across the border. I'm in Paiute country. That whole of Nevada was Paiute, the Native American people. That was their land. And there's a nice little, if you ever go to Reno, there's a nice little Paiute museum just outside there. But I'm going through northern Nevada and it's so desolate. And I stopped in this little tavern at a pint, and I'm talking to these guys and they worked in silver and tungsten mines, and the whole atmosphere there, it was, funnily enough, it wasn't super Trump. I thought it would be, there are super Trump elements there, but it was, the concern people had was just, surviving. Really, about I don't know what's going to happen. Who knows? This insecurity, which of course Trump loves, this chaos that they love anyway. But the other thing, so when I'm talking about the mass media, there's some big strikes taking place, and I figure. Well, somebody was talking yesterday. We were talking with yesterday. Was saying about how the dangers with the failure of the judiciary, including the Supreme Court, to put a brake on Trump and that MAGA movement, and that is disconcerting. But my view is they're not going to not go after the rest of the working class. That when people they're in a situation where, well, it's not happening to me. It's not nice, but it's not happening to me. But it's going to happen to you. I can't see how the Trump assault is not going to go on, increase on organized labor, like we have some big strikes now. So there's been a big strike in Los Angeles last month. There are a number of strikes. There's a big strike in Philadelphia. That's I think the second largest district council of my union, ASME, there's about 9,000 blue collar workers on strike there. Unfortunately, some of them are cops, but because ASME represents some police. But the big thing is it's trash workers, so trash is piling up. That's going on right now. The UAW has a number of strikes going on right now. So at some point, the Trump is going to turn on them with the same viciousness as he has with the weaker illegals. I don't like that term, but he's gonna at some point, a strike, he's going to intervene in these things, and that's going to change it's going to kickstart, I think. I'm saying this just as I'm thinking this just as I'm talking it. So, but I think my view is it will kickstart the response from the working class as a whole. And what comes to me, as much as I have no little faith in the so-called socialist left, who really are responsible also for not having provided an alternative for the working, not able to, not being successful in sinking deep roots in the working class in this country, is that when I first joined the CWI, what made sense to me was when they would argue that the working class, when it moves into struggle, has a tendency, this was new to me, so some of you guys are older and been around, not necessarily older, but been around them longer and been in revolutionary politics longer than me. But the view that the working class, when it moves into struggle, it seeks class allies. Old prejudices can be eradicated quite quickly. And it's like I always say, you go on a picket line and try and tell a racist joke. It's not going to work. It's just that class unity that develops in struggle, and that doesn't mean that the reactionary ideas come back again and everything else. But so I see that happening. I really can't look forward to anything else, because that's my view of the world. I'm not religious. I don't look to God or any of these things, but I think that will occur. And I'll wrap it up. There's just a few thoughts thinking. But the tragedy of the bloody ICE thing, though, they are really hated. I mean, I talked to my son yesterday. He's remodeling a place down in Long Beach, where he is right now, and the guy that's working with him is an El Salvadorian. Noah picks him up and drives him to the work, and then takes him home because the guy's afraid to drive. The guy that put in my driveway here, he's been here 17 years. I don't want to mention any names. You're recording this, but he's every day he goes out. He's got 2 kids. He's terrified. You know, it's a horrific thing that's going on here around that. But just the last thing on the politics. I mean, the world is turned upside down, as I think Christopher Hill wrote that book, The World Upside Down, or something like that. I mean, the Republicans used to be vicious in the defense of states' rights, and it's completely flipped on its head now. They were against big government, that is completely flipped on its head now. And they are lessening the government in terms of employees, but in terms of the government's intervention in the states, it's clearly not what the traditional Republican position has been. I'll leave it at that. I think that's good, and you know, I guess we can all come in if we want to say more or anything. So I think that'll do for now for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for that very insightful contribution, particularly in relation to the trade unions and the strike actions that are breaking out, which is going to be a significant part of the analysis for the future perspectives for the US. Thanks again for your contribution. Now, I have a number of speakers who have indicated, starting with Eric, followed by Norma, followed by Roger. So, Eric. Where is he?
Yeah, hi, good morning. I don't have much to add to either of those. Thanks. Thank you both, Jack and Richard, for those. Just a few things. I'm fairly or somewhat active in DSA. It takes a really strong stomach. There's just awful politics in there. However, it's probably at this point, as far as politics outside the labor unions, the most important thing to pay attention to, because that's where the young people that want to get involved in politics mostly go. And couple things, just some brief things. All right, did somebody talking in the background? All right. The main podcast for Jacobin, which is probably the main, you could call it, we don't use the term social democratic in the US, but it's their main publication. Their big podcast is called The Dig. And it's mostly not very interesting. It's kind of intellectual and wonky, but they do about 2.5 hours on the Mandani. And this is really their big waving around flag. What I've heard called recently the professional managerial class, which has in the last 10 or 15 years moved somewhat to the left. They want to recreate European social democracy of a couple decades ago. I think we all know they're not going to be able to be successful at that. But what they're trying to do, if you can sit through this podcast, it's very wonkish and super detailed, is they want to supplant the Democratic Party. That's what they're trying to do. And they're not even particularly ambitious about winning any of Mondani's goals, I would say. That's what I took from it. But they can see that he'll be this wedge against Trump. Trump will pay a lot of attention to him, and they'll leverage up attention on that. So just a little bit here. DSA was a little tiny nothing, little kind of left of the Democratic Party until Trump about 10 years ago. And now it hovers between 70 and 90,000. And almost all of those are young people. Some are from working class backgrounds, most are not. Mostly it's middle class, college, and professional level, and a pile of union staff. You can't imagine. You go to a DSA meeting and it's like a third the people are union staffers. So that makes it pretty difficult. You raise any kind of thing critical of union leadership and you're shut down right away. That notwithstanding, there's some interesting currents there in DSA. I'm not really optimistic about it, but it's a good place to meet people. And most of you aren't in the US, but it's a good place to meet young people and talk politics. They might not do what you suggest, but they'll at least listen to you. A lot of them are open to a lot of different things. For example, there's about 30 DSA members in the Oakland Teachers Union here in Oakland, California. So there was just one other thing, kind of to be a little pessimistic, I wanted to point out that part of this big omnibus spending bill that the Trump government just put through was $45 billion specifically to immigration detention centers. So what we've got here in the U.S., the way I see it, is we've got Frycorps. They've gone out and organized Frycorps in advance of the working class popping up and fighting back, which, as Richard was mentioning, is happening. It's happening in an organized or coordinated way, but it is happening. People are fighting back. And I think that there's an understanding, except for maybe the most backward. I'm in touch with, I retired a year and a half ago, and I stay in touch with the people I used to work with. I was an operator of a water treatment plant. And most of them don't like Trump. About 20% are Trumpies. But most of them don't like Trump, but they don't see a way like, well, what do we do about it? I don't really like that. And anyway, it might not affect me, or it probably won't affect me. I would say that's probably a decent slice of life for the attitude of a lot of American workers. But I wanted to point out how there was I'm just reading this off the line now. There's $170 billion. I mean, it's a bigger budget than a lot of whole countries have for militaries for these new special body, in air quotes, the special bodies of armed men. A lot of these people aren't even sworn law enforcement in an official way. They're people that can handle a gun and are willing to come and be enforcers. So that's really kind of terrifying. And I don't want to be defeatist. I'm not a defeatist, but that wing of the bourgeois that are behind Trump, that kind of look to be less engaged internationally and more exploit this huge market here in the U.S. Are kind of a step ahead of the game, and I'm concerned about this. On the other hand, the American working class is armed, so it's kind of a different playing field than mostly people have discussed in the last many decades here or other places in the world. I don't have a good perspective. I don't know, but I'm disturbed at what I'm seeing. I'm also encouraged by the fact that a lot of people really do want to fight back. They mentioned these No Kings protests, and also the fact that it's largely the old liberal establishment that's organizing them. And a lot of the talking points are horrible. Support NATO, hands off NATO, this kind of, hoping that we can go back to the US of 25 or 30 years ago and be kind of what a lot of Americans thought was this benevolent hegemon, which of course people in other parts of the world knew very well it wasn't benevolent. Anyway, that's all I got. And thank you very much, as always, for organizing these talks.
Thank you, Eric. Important insights. Norma?
Hello. I think Roger was the first of everybody here who wanted to speak before Richard. So if Roger want to speak before me, I
No, you
invite
go ahead,
him.
Norma.
Well, thank you. I am saying that I am expecting at the moment, said, and here in particular, to have not just a description of what is going on in United States now, or in the Trump administration, said and I thank in any case to all the comrades who describe that and also make points, but also to have an understanding, or at least to try, why we are in this situation. I am not in United States. I have not lived in United States, just visited for a while for conferences, but I am looking for, and I try to analyze in comparison to with what's happening with other parts of the world. And I want to, and I think the situation of Trump, or the situation beyond Trump, I mean of United States today, is in the context of what is happening, more or less, in other parts of the world. I mean, of the capitalist world, of developed or just developed. I mean, if we compare with Europe, and we compare with some other countries, as my original country, Argentina in South America, who is many influenced now by United States. It was always influenced by United States. So, Trump, I mean, Trump, or I'm trying to say that we cannot analyze the situation just from Republicans, from the Republicans and Democratic parties, or some others, or just because now in New York City there is a Democrat, more progressist, elected in the primaries. I mean, we have seen that Trump have been elected against expectations inside and outside the country twice, and against the expectations, I mean, again, the expectation that it was a president, or just a second vote after pandemia. You know that very few presidents were re-elected after pandemia. There is United States and France. Also very particular, a very interesting comparison situation, but I will not do that here today. So, Trump make this election second. The fact of Democrats, I mean, with Hillary Clinton, I need to make names just to make, I mean, I want to speak conceptually, but just to make periods, said Hillary Clinton, do you recall? Then it was Obama in the Democrats. Then it was Biden from the Democrats. Then it came Kamala Harris from the Democrats. And even with the Democrats, what changed in the United States, really? I mean, for popular people, for homeless, for workers, for for working class, popular classes, and so on. So I do not have, I mean, I have not make an study, an investigation, but I think that it's it would be very interesting for comrades who are in this set, in these studies, in these militants, etc., who are active there, to make this perspective, because we cannot just to analyze in terms of what is thinking or what are thinking Democrats now or Republicans, because what have showed in this new, some kind of new context, new era in the world, a new context, is that when people who go to vote, because there are a part which also do not vote, but still there are an active part which go to vote, is they want new outcomers, new political movements, not parties just said, but movements. Outsiders have made also the case. And finish with that. The case of the said capitalist or rich, very, very rich people who came in politics is not new. The fact what is new is that now they are more visible because we are in a globalization of everything, and so they are more visible. The technology makes that they need to be more visible. Everybody needs to be more visible. And in particular, the case in United States, I mean, Elon Musk is I need to put names, I mean, Elon Musk is the most exceptional case in the world of that. And now he has its own, I don't know if it will succeed to have its own party, but has launched its own party, which is not surprising because he has launched the own company to go to space, which was not in the, imaginable that, and it succeeded to do that. So I think we need to understand and to propose the solution, what the more needed people and the working, we are workers also, and with which values to have some success in the organization. It's not only to go to, it's very good to have strikes, to go to streets and so on, but really from the needs, and not for some said, as now in New York City, the discussions, and they want, to said, because there is this new elected, which is progressist and so on, there is some, I think that, already it was Obama, already was Kamala Harris, already was Biden, and the movement, the roots do not came from that, or at least not mainly from that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norma. The next speaker to indicate is Roger, and Roger will be followed then by Temos. So, Roger.
Okay, thanks, comrades. Actually, I want to mainly ask a question of Jack and Richard. When I first contacted them on behalf of WIN to invite them to speak today, I suggested a title for the meeting, a bit of a provocative title: "Is the USA heading for civil war?" It was not a statement that it is, but it was a question. And both comrades, said no, they didn't think that was an appropriate title. They didn't think it was heading for civil war. I want to ask why. And the reason is because I've got a few points which seem to me to indicate that that would be at least a very possible outcome. I'm not talking about it, in the next couple of years, but in the not too very distant future either, because we've seen the USA, which in 1960 it was producing 40% of global output. It's slumped now to its share of world production now is less than 25%. And as with any empire in its declining decades, and of course the Roman Empire is the classic case, which is often quoted, this decay generates the most morbid symptoms in society: a rotting culture, daily acts of senseless horror, and so on. And along with that, just to put a little bit of background, I mean that one of the symptoms, or among the symptoms of this decay, are the way that they've quickly switched from a policy of free trade to the most ruthless protectionism and tariffs, and a slowdown in the economy. And we see also, as comrades have described very well, the most horrific and brutal attacks on the working class, particularly on migrants. I mean, things that are indescribable. I don't think any of us, including the US comrades, could have expected that the Trump administration would resort to such utterly, shockingly brutal things of picking people off the street and throwing them into concentration camps in El Salvador and Djibouti and wherever else, South Sudan and all the rest of it. And all the rest, I don't need to go over all the other examples of that. But it's a turn towards autocracy and Bonapartism and so on. Now, at the same time, as we see this violence on the side of the right wing, I mean, it's already an incredibly violent and volatile society. The figures I've got may be a little out of date, but I don't think there would have been changed much. Every day, 53 people die. That's every day of gunshot wounds, whether it's by accident or murder or suicide. There are every week, on average, 11 massacres, wanton massacres. I think Richard gave a quote, a more up-to-date quote. Police shootings at a rate of something like 3 every day. We had, of course, in 2000 and when was it? 2016, 2020, sorry, 2021, the Capitol riots. When a mob of crazed hooligans and including also organised fascists stormed the Capitol building in an attempt to block a democratic election. And of course, that was a bit of a shambles and so on. But I mean, if they move towards that kind of action next time, surely we can be sure they're going to be properly prepared this time, and it'll be a lot more organised and a lot more dangerous. On the other hand, we've got tidal wave of protest sweeping the country, especially in the last 5 years or so. Black Lives Matter, Me Too, demonstrations of school students on demanding gun control, women's protests against the reimposition of laws against abortion rights, surge of trade union recruitment that comrades have described already, including previously unorganized young workers like the Amazon delivery drivers and Starbucks workers and so on. And according to a poll, which I think is only maybe 3 or 4 years out of date, I'd be interested to know if there's a later update on that. But support for socialism among young people has gone, well, it's something like 50%. They may not know what they mean by socialism and so on. And I do think I completely agree with the outrage at Sanders's refusal to actually organise a socialist party. But nevertheless, I must say, looking at the video clips, both Sanders and Mamdani they do speak very well and very sharply and forthrightly. They speak better than any of the than Corbyn or any of the people that we've got here. Very sharply attacking the rule of the billionaires and so on. And true, what a betrayal that they don't actually do anything about it. But the talk about that must be percolating through among victimized workers, among young people, among people threatened with deportation, among the what is it, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands who've been chucked out of their job by the Elon Musk thing. And by the way, the split between Trump and Musk has come just 6 months into the Trump presidency, or less. I mean, it shows a completely unstable. Unstable is hardly the word for it. A society which is really rotting and falling apart. And in this situation, Eric also talked about a Freikorps developing. He's talking about the workers fighting back. He's talking about an armed working class. With all of this, why is the idea of an impending civil war? As I say, I don't mean, but why is that something which the comrades rule out?
Thank you, Roger. Timos.
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting idea about discussing whether it's civil war. And it's the first time I hear it. I don't know. I have no ready answer for that. But one thing I would like to say is that when we talk about what's happening in America, we should have in mind that it's not just America. We are talking about what's happening in the whole of the world. And what we see in America today, it sounds so familiar to what happened in Greece, to what happened in France, what happened in Britain. And every time it's becoming more vicious and more unstable. So I don't think that we can talk about organizing or about how things will develop or what's going to happen in the same normal way that we have been talking in the previous years. What we see now in America and what we see in the rest of the world is definitely the sort of decadence that has, as Roger said, showing society rotting and falling apart. They cannot have a stable government. They cannot have a stable capitalist system. They cannot have what was going on, because all the dynamics of capitalism and the capitalist system have been negated by the rule of really big capital, the rule of the monopolies, which is just a handful of companies, and the rest of the people are becoming more and more irrelevant of what they think. Democracy is gone. I mean, what's happened when you have Starmer pushing this bill about protests? Is something that nobody could expect that. And surprise, surprise, the same sort of bill is being discussed today and is probably going to pass through Parliament in Cyprus. I don't want to compare Cyprus with Britain, which is much bigger, or Britain with America, which is much more important. But the processes are there, and the thing that we should be discussing, I think, before we go to the details of whether Sanders or Mamdani or Corbyn, they say a lot of irrelevant things or just not revolutionary enough things. What is the situation in which we discuss these things? The situation is that revolutions and fascism are going to fight it out soon, and there are going to be explosions in one country after another. I don't know which is going to be first or second, or whether they will be successful or not. But the situation is very unstable. And as Napoleon said, nobody can start a revolution and nobody can stop a revolution. The only thing that can be done is some of its children give it a direction through their victories. And the Russian Revolution was not organized by Lenin. Lenin was in Switzerland, and he wasn't expecting a revolution in Russia, but it broke out just the same. And when he was as surprised as anybody else. And if he didn't rush to go to Russia to change the politics of his party, we don't know what would happen. I'm afraid that we are running the danger of falling into the same trap, discussing normality in a very, very abnormal situation. I mean, what is the form that revolution will take in today's world? It's like the yellow vests, is like Black Lives Matter, is like the demonstrations in LA. This is how it's going to build the consciousness for a fight and revolution. It will take some time, but we are not very far from that. And we shouldn't minimize, we shouldn't underestimate the importance of people like Sanders, or like Mamdani, or like Corbyn. I mean, Corbyn's program, what is it? Nobody, very few of us could see that it was an important program. But even now, he's attracting all these people. Mamdani, his program may be very modest, but modest programs in these days, they lead to revolutions. We've seen it with the program of Syriza in Greece. We've seen it with the program of Corbyn in the Labour Party. And we are seeing today again with Corbyn. I don't know how far he will go. So that's how it's going to start. And the working class will always seek allies. And these people are, at the first stages at least, at this stage we're living now, the allies, the potential allies of the working class. They will not go to the end, maybe not. Maybe the working class will find ways to take over this movement, but unless it joins it in the first place, it will just be left out. So I would see both Sanders and Mamdani and AOC and Corbyn as potential allies, but they are changing the consciousness of the society up to a point, and we have to take over further down. What is our job? Is just to understand the situation, to organize, to have programs, work out programs that will be implemented, but at the same time fight together with all these potential allies so that we can make a difference.
Thank you, Timos. I see, Jack, you're gesticulating wildly there for some reason.
Yeah, about Sanders and Mamdani being allies. It's one thing to say they represent, at this point, a popular opinion and resentment to Trump. It's another thing to call them potential, particularly Sanders. We can go through what Sanders has done and what he represents. Richard talked about it and I talked about it. It's one thing to say that you'll block with him and have united front and block on particular things. It's another thing, to say that he's a potential ally. I think that's a major mistake. I want to say something else, which is about the US, which is a very vast country. It's a mistake to turn possibilities into probabilities and to condense timelines. The fact is that there will be coming massive class struggle, as has happened before in the US. If we didn't think that, then what would we be doing here talking about anything? So that can take the form of civil war. In fact, it is a form of civil war. But to say, is the US on the verge of civil war is not, anything is possible. Anything can break out and happen. But we tend to see developments that occur. For example, the fact that in Los Angeles, you had a significant fight back against ICE detentions. That's great. There are certain things which we ought to see from it, which you haven't commented on. For example, instead of just looking at the trade unions, to look at the fact that trade unions represent only 10% of the American working class. And what we need is massive organizing drive among the unorganized, especially immigrants, who make up so much of what's going to have to be the potential for mass class struggle. Something else, which is that Warren Buffett, when he was the richest man in the world, and he's still one of the richest, said when asked why he is for mitigating the amount that's going to the bourgeoisie, to providing more social services and so on, he said, they said, aren't you then trying to instigate something like class warfare? And he said, there is class warfare. And only my class has been winning overwhelmingly for so long, and we're going to get eventually swept away unless we mitigate it. There's always class war going on, and it can break out into much more massive struggle, which you can call civil war, and could become civil war. It could happen in the U.S. We've talked in the past. I've presented here more than once about putting the U.S. and what's going on in a global perspective in terms of the deindustrialization which occurred, and making similarities to what's going on elsewhere, particularly noting what's going on in the north of England, and what happened to the Red Wall there, in terms of what happened to to the Democratic Wall in the Rust Belt, and we've talked about this numerous times. So and we can repeat it ad nauseum. There's a tremendous amount, to discuss. In this case, it's easy to jump the fence and get away from what the actual state of things is in this country, and go on to, to the vast, wide open spaces. But I think that's a mistake. I also think it's a mistake to compress timelines and to turn possibilities into probabilities. It's not that there's class war that's always going on. Look, I could talk about, and didn't because of the lack of time, going back to what happened at the end of the post-war boom in 1969, 1970 or so. The Partnership for New York and associated organizations of the bourgeoisie, sitting committees of the ruling class, instituted deliberately a policy of austerity, which led to a structural adjustment in neoliberalism on the basis that we can, the post-war boom had ended, and they said, we cannot afford to support the public sector to the degree we're doing now. We must demand huge cuts. And I can talk about the specific way in which the whole establishment in New York, actually shock troops from the liberal Ford Foundation, went into the schools and elsewhere to try to implement programs of such structural adjustment.
Jack, I'm sorry to interrupt you again, Jack. Jack, I'm sorry to interrupt you. A number of comrades have indicated they want to speak.
Okay, well, I'm willing to stop now, but I also want to let people know that we have a vast country and a huge amount to talk about, and I'd be happy to talk about what happened then. And in 1975 in New York City, the dress rehearsal for neoliberalism, to put what's going on now with Mamdani in context, and other things which people might be interested in, rather than telling us what we don't know and why we ought to be talking about things globally because we're so ignorant. And that's the impression that I got from what a couple of people said. I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. We have a number of speakers. Dominic, followed by Jimmy, followed by Joel, and Eric has indicated he wanted to speak again. We've got to bear in mind that there'll be summing up involved. So can comrades please limit the amount of time for their contributions. So we've got Dominic, followed by Jimmy.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on something that Richard was saying, and it sort of follows on from the last comrade who spoke about the question of Sanders and why didn't he break with the Democrats and so on, and why it speaks for a program of reform, serious reform in the interests of the working class. But at the end of the day, it doesn't follow through with it. As the comrade said, when it comes to it, he bends the knee to the Democratic Party, and his role and why he doesn't break is because he doesn't want to. That's not his role. His role is to raise sort of left-wing policies and build a sense around it to avoid that grouping, actually realizing that they've got to form an independent organisation. And I think we're going to get the same in this country if Corbyn goes along the road, because he's not interested in a left formation. All he's interested in my opinion, is getting back in the Parliamentary Labour Party. He was on the telly last Friday night discussing with a former Tory minister about arms. And I didn't get the whole programme, but what the bit I got was about arms to Israel. And this Tory minister says, well, they're at war. They need the arms. And Corbyn just sat there. They need the arms for genocide. That's not war. So I think there's got to be a sort of realisation that these people, and it's something I think we've got to get over, have absolutely no interest in advancing the interests of the working class. They're more interested in the parliamentary system and the status quo.
Thank you, Dominic. Jimmy?
I just wanted to focus in on one particular. Sorry, two microphones going. Sorry.
Jimmy, you're muted there. You're still muted, Jimmy. Okay.
Anything there?
That's fine. That's grand.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to take up just one particular point, and it's the question of the US Army. At the moment, it's quite understandable, logically, given the amount of finance put to it. It's potentially the strongest army in the world. But it's an army that's made up of machines, and it's also made up of technology, but it's also made up of people. Now, my understanding of it is that the vast majority of people who join the US Army are people who come from poorer backgrounds. It's a career choice rather than a political commitment. They come from poorer backgrounds. They want a stable job, so they join the army. Most of the unions have agreements that they open their doors and they have reserved training and reserved admission to the unions for people coming out of the army. But the questions that I look at is how stable the army is, both while they're being served and while the people leave the army itself. The current logic is that the right wing are ruling America at this stage. So the right wing are running the country, they're making the decisions, they're setting the budgets. It's safe to say that most people would feel secure in an army with a government that's given them preference. But when they leave the army, what sort of life do they have? Is there a provision for them to continue a protected lifestyle? The last couple of weeks, we've watched with horror of the massacres, the daily massacres of the foodless people in Gaza. And it has become quite clear that a lot of the people who are doing these killings, they go under various titles. They go mainly under contractors. They're not just members of the Israeli army or defense forces. They are private mercenaries, and a lot of them are American. The corporations that hire them are American. The people who train them, collect them, and dispatch them are American. And the reasons a lot of those guys are there is probably to enhance their earning potential. Some of them might just go for the adventure. Some of them might just simply be criminals. But to me, it reflects that the attraction of a peaceful lifestyle in America, even at this stage, is not there to guarantee that people won't look to become mercenaries just as a lifestyle to protect themselves. So the questions in my mind is, if the right-wing government, the right-wing system, continues to stay in power, elected into power, and I don't think it will the right-wing have enough reserves to keep an army, a state army, at their beck and call? Or will they start to discard the army and force those people with military training to either in uniform represent the right wing against their neighbours, their friends, their communities, or will it force them to actually join with them in defending and protesting and fighting back? So the real question is there a future of stability in the American army for the rank and file? And the other question linked with it is whether the leadership, the military leadership, would have motivation or balls to effectively operate a mutiny against the state and create a military state. Now, so that might be a longer term question, but it still has, in my mind, a linkage to the whole situation of the structure and nature of the American army. So I just ask that if any comrades have any opinions on that.
Thank you, Jimmy. The next comrade to indicate was Joel.
Okay. I'd like to comment just generally about prospects in the United States. What we've discussed many times in these forums, that in the United States, there's a vacuum, and in the midst of that vacuum, much can happen. And when we're talking about prospects and things that could happen, civil war, the unraveling of society, what I see a lot, is that the working class in the midst of that vacuum will turn to many different solutions, many of which seem irrational, erratic, strange. This is happening more and more as I see it amongst a group of industrial workers who are very subject to things like automation that are not well understood, I think, enough in terms of even the formal logic of it amongst the general population in the United States, less more the working class. And I think getting to what Richard Mellor pointed out about the ecological circumstances, these floods that are going on in Texas and fires in California, this is all accelerating at such a rate. And the left, I think on the one hand, you have the left that is in the established industrial sectors with unions, which is one section of the left. And then the kind of youth left around Mondani in the DSA, which tends to be more in the service sectors with less, the unions having been around maybe not quite as long or not as established. And what I can see from workers, I code a union that just break up into discord, almost to the point where you're seeing violence over this kind of confusion And I talked to the old timers, you know, things were never like this before. We used to have orderly meetings. We could do things. The ILW was known as a very progressive union that always took a stand on political issues. And it's harder for it. You don't have these kind of discussions with people about these broader political questions. Should we support boycott, hot cargo these ships that are taking armaments to Israel? You know, I've been involved with a lot of research going on with this. I don't want to go on for too long, but to kind of sum up, I believe it is our duty as leftists, as socialists in the working class, to explain things scientifically, even if it means in a formal, logical sense of what bourgeois economists supporting solar panels, things of this nature. And then, you know, getting to the point where we're going to have a worker-run economy that can organize things in such a way where we won't have this ecological destruction. Is, you know, you talk to the left now that is in these unions, and it's almost like the Tweedledum Tweedledee effect. Like that they're just, you say that, you know, what is your position on a transitional program towards a green economy? They don't have one. They do not have one. You know, if you talk about that thing to them, oh, well, you're just going along with the Green New Deal, which incidentally was originally brought forward by Milton Friedman, who's a neoliberal economist. So, you know, in the absence of some kind of a larger movement, workers turn to conspiracy theory. And I've heard things as far off and as wacko as that transgender aliens from outer space are trying to create automation. And people, I mean, people, blue collar workers in the United States actually will, you know, they'll come to smaller union meetings and try to scare other workers into believing this kind of thing. And the left has no answer to this. You know, they want to focus. I mean, there's nothing wrong with focusing on police brutality, the immigrants, but we have to have some kind of solution to this, as rich, because these kinds of things will bring about further movements towards a fascist type organizing. As working class people are thrown out by natural disasters, there's going to be more and more attempting to put the blame on immigrants and trans people, and without an alternative, you know, this leads to a lot of chaos. So anyway, I think we it is our duty to have some kind of even basic scientific program on these issues of automation and how we can continue to have jobs for blue collar workers going into the future. So I got to just leave it there.
Thank you, Joel. Our final speaker will be Eric. I'd ask Eric to be brief, and then we'll have some brief concluding remarks, first from Richard and then from Jack. So, Eric.
I'll be very brief. Just the thing that I don't think was really been said is the degree to which it's obviously not in any way completely true, but it's true in a very, very big way that a lot of the American working class, a lot of the American middle class have given up on the American imperial project. 25 years ago, I'd go to work and more than half the people were gung-ho. Yes, bomb Iraq. Let's invade. America, good. America in the foreign world, good. And that's gone. And that's even a lot of what was the support for Trump, is the promise we won't be involved internationally anymore. Now, we know Trump is at least as bellicose, as Jack pointed out, in a less organized way, but nevertheless, still very much so. But this was the promise, and this is the promise of a lot of the right-wing thinkers who were the big Trump accolades, like Steve Bannon would be one of the main ones, is they're promising this disengagement from American imperialism. This is something the American left has totally missed, has just missed completely, that we should oppose the US being involved internationally. It's a no-brainer. And I raise it and people look at me like I have two heads. They want to talk about Palestine, and great. Of course, we think what's happening there is awful, you know, the genocide, but that's the thing. And then to speak to the original premise that that was raised in inviting Jack and Richard to speak. What I think there is a possibility of, both from what I see in terms of building up ICE, the immigration enforcement body, and also from some of the young activists, they're flirting with urban guerrillism. A couple of people here in the Bay Area have actually been to Syria and fought with the Kurds there. And there are some, and I discourage them, like I've said, some of the young activists will listen to me, but they won't ever do what I say. They talk about things that make me very nervous, you know, like you think dirty war Argentina, or, you know, the troubles in Ireland. I think that there is a very real possibility of really ugly tit-for-tat violence in the place of class struggle. And so that has to do with, bodies on the left organize? Will the union leadership get its act together? I think we know it won't. But, you know, again, America is an armed country. Most people, or many, many people, own guns. So it's entirely possible that we'll see a lot more things like that, you know, and I don't know where that'll go. But yeah, no, that's real. Would it be a civil war? Probably not. But there's a tradition. We got to remember, too, you know, the United States has a huge chunk of the population that's very, very marginal. You know, there's a tremendous history of racism and everything else. There are communities that live kind of outside the mainstream where there's a lot of violence, a lot by European standards. I remember, just to close, when I was visiting the UK 9-10 years ago, you know, a story got told to me about a confrontation with a gun in a bar there in London. And I responded. That kind of thing happens all the time in the US. It's not even news. So anyway, that's enough. Thank you so much for the talk. And hopefully we can get to some good conclusions and figure out what to do.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Now we'll have some brief concluding remarks, firstly from Richard and then from Jack.
All right. I'll try to be quick. But first, I want to respond to Jimmy Kelly, because there's a good point, excellent point he raises. The US military is a very diverse bunch, and it's got its problems. It's racially mixed. I think he's out to kicking trans out of there. I don't know about the gay people in there. I don't know enough about it. But we really don't know what's going on within the brass of the military, for one thing. But and we really don't know all the divisions within the troops, because you're forbidden to have political views on that out, you know, in uniform and all of that sort of stuff. But that's a bit of a dark area for us. We don't know what might happen there. But it's important, and I'm glad Jimmy raised it. And yes, this is a violent country. I mean, I watch a lot of the British. I'm just watching Blue Lights now about Northern Ireland and the troubles and but I mean, when I was last year, I was in Salisbury and I got chatting to this cop, you know, talking to her and this, that, and the other. And when I watch those things, you just got to watch the difference between American and British shows. You don't touch a cop here. You don't put your hands on a cop here. I tell people that come here, if the cop stops you in the car, you put your hands on the goddamn steering wheel and keep them there so we can see them until they tell you, what to do or whatever. You don't touch cops here. They can kill you and they can get away with it. It's only recently they've not, in relation to racial killings, but prior to that, they never were charged. But it is a very violent country. It's a settler state. When I was up in Northern California, and there's histories in the rest stops about the local tribes, and it talks about the little bit of the history. It's like Israel, and settlers have a certain mentality, you know, and they have a certain mentality. The European settlers here believe this is a white country and it's a Christian country. You know, that's how a lot of them feel. And the point about what happened, that Sanders, I don't want to get back into that again, but really, you know, there's only so many times you can cry wolf. and offer people a way forward and then go do the same crap again. He's lost so much credibility. And I agree with Jack's points about him. You know, I agree with Mamdani will end up like him if he continues down the road he's going. The other thing about Trump, I mean, if you look at, there's no faith in the institutions of the capitalist class anymore here. There's no faith. Americans are the most cynical about politics. Or my neighbor voted for Trump, decent human being. Two reasons: he's a contractor, and he's a Christian, and it's abortion. I mean, whatever you want to make a judge, he's a very decent human being, though. I can tell you that. But he says he really thought he had sorted out. They're all scoundrels, he says, and they're people. You know what happens when all the crap goes on and the same stuff's repeated? Well, a strong man comes along and says, well, we'll sort this shit out. That's what's lacking with Sanders, with the left, with the trade unions, with oppositionists in this country, is that you've got to show that we want this and we'll kick some ass to get it. There's nothing wrong with some aggression. The Democratic Party's partially responsible for Trump with all their woke politics, that extremely woke politics. You know, Americans are willing to fight. That's why but there's nowhere to go, as I said. And yeah, so I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. I've spoken already. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for that contribution and for your earlier contribution and for your participation in the discussion. It's been very positive and very informative. So, Jack, you'll be the concluding speaker, so please keep your remarks as brief as you can.
Okay, I'll keep them brief. I think that in terms of civil war, I'll go back to that. In order to have a civil war, you have to have two sides that are organized to fight against each other. And right now, one side is much better organized than the other, and that's the right wing. I think that Jimmy Kelly's questions are relevant in terms of, will the right wing force the army to join with them? You know, will the leadership be able to induce a mutiny against the state? It's possible. It's possible that there'll be splits in the one way in which a civil war could develop, as a possibility, is there can be splits in the military. There are regional commanders who are Christian nationalists, you know, racists and anti-immigrant very strongly in certain parts of the country. The Air Force Academy used to be, and may still be in Colorado, the Air Force Academy was a hornet's nest of Christian fundamentalism from the commandant on down. And it's possible that should you have particularly some mass pushback in demonstrations, that you could, Trump has said he wants to use the military against demonstrators. And it's very possible that you could get a split in the military over that. So I think it's a relevant question. One thing I want to point out is that capitalism has been more resilient than I think any of us probably anticipated. Back in the 1970s, it looked like there was no way out for the system. But unless there is going to be some form of a stabilization, unless capitalism is overthrown. That's what Lenin said, and that was part of Lenin's debate, you know, with Luxemburg and others. And I believe that was correct. And they may be able to stumble their way out, not to have, you know, to get along for another period. That's possible. There has to be some form of organized mass resistance, and I think it's going to require a new leadership. We talk about the left in this country, but I don't. I think that there's going to have to be something new that gets thrown up, from among especially immigrants and younger workers and new political developments in order to have a successful fight back. Maybe that'll take the form initially of workers going to the and reinvigorating their old institutions. But it's going to have to be much more than that. In the U.S., it's going to have to reach out far beyond, the now 1 in 10 workers who are in the trade unions. And among those, if we exclude the building trades, which we can talk about why they might be excluded, it's far less than that. So I'm gonna stop there. But I think I think that it's very likely that we're going to see more developments coming and more push from Trump. And I'll say one more thing. Right now, despite all the fear that's being engendered, and it's being engendered deliberately, there have been far fewer deportations, even on a percentage basis to this point, than was done by Obama, than was done under Bill Clinton, and that was done under Bush the second, and so on. That was done under Biden. But Trump, they tried to downplay it and to say, no, we're not really doing much in that, and to downplay, the horrors that were being inflicted by ICE back then. Trump is deliberately building it up, and in order to try to frighten and stampede. The fact that they haven't done more proportionally than the others have indicates the problems that they are actually having in actually putting this program forward, and the fact that there is resistance to it, some of it not overt, as well as the problems that they have in terms of actually being able to implement efficiently, which they don't do. And so I don't want to minimize the dangers, but I also think that it's a mistake, to try to telescope what's going on, and to forget that when we talk about the resistance, the strikes, and so on that are going on, those at this point are actually forestalling civil war, because they're resistance, but they're not organized in terms of a mass opposition to it. So you'll get, episodic attacks like the one in Los Angeles, but you don't get a full-fledged front taking place across the country. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Jack. I'm sure the comrades will agree. It's been a very, very good meeting and very useful, and the contributions of the American comrades have been particularly valuable in bringing new insights into the situation that they're facing over there, and the situation has world implications. So I want to thank Jack and Richard for their opening contributions, but also there were 7 interventions by comrades in the meeting, and each one was a thought-out, serious insight or analysis of some issue of relevance. And we don't resolve all our questions at the WIN meetings. They stimulate discussion, and they shed light and Marxist analysis on the issues we face. So there's lots to think about and lots more to examine. But thanks to all the comrades for their contributions to what I think was a very, very useful meeting. So before we hand over to Roger to explain the next meeting, I want to thank you all again. So goodbye and good night to you all. Slán go léir agus ihe. Roger, do you want to tell us about next week?
Yes, but first of all, I'd like to echo what you said, Finn. I thought it was a fantastically useful discussion. I've learned a lot from it. And I'd also like to reassure Jack and Richard that I wasn't challenging their position, but I asked my question for clarification, and I think they clarified the issue very, very well, and I think we've all learned a huge amount. Right, next week, well, comrades will remember that a few weeks ago we had a very good lead-off by our Iranian comrade, Aman. Since that time, quite a lot has happened in Iran. So we've asked him to come back next week and to describe the situation now, the war, the bombings, their relations now. What was the relative balance of forces between Iran and Israel in terms of the military struggle, but also what effect it had, for better or worse, on the internal situation and the stability of the regime in Iran and so on. So that also will be a very, very enlightening meeting, I believe. So I hope all the comrades will come, and I'll see you then.
Well,
Yep.
Hello.
Okay, bye, comrades.
Thank you.